My oldest son recently received Mage Knight for his 9th birthday. He and his 6-year-old brother immediately wanted to play it after seeing the miniatures, tiles, cards, and all the other cool little bits included in the game. I was excited when I saw that the game was for ages 14 plus. The homeschooler in me saw this as a possible challenging learning experience for them. And challenging is good. It's facing and overcoming challenges where real learning can be had. So let's explore Mage Knight and the educational opportunities we found while playing it. First, let me start by giving a brief overview of what Mage Knight is and how it is played. You play as a Mage Knight, surprise, surprise, whose main motivation is the gaining of fame, knowledge, treasure, and power. Your objective in the game? Well, that depends. There are various scenarios one can play, and they all include different winning conditions. And a lot of them, if not most, you will be focused on gaining the most fame, which usually determines the winner. Again, depending on the scenario. There are a few different ways one can earn fame. By defeating enemies at various locations on the board, gaining new actions, spell, artifact, or unit cards, or by conquering certain locations. Some fame is scored immediately, some at the end of the game. The game takes place over a limited number of rounds that alternate between day and night. The exact number of rounds varies again depending on the scenario. Players alternate taking turns each round until a player runs out of cards in his or her deck. Any one player. Turns are fairly simple. A player first plays cards that provide movement points from their hand that equal or exceed the number of movement points needed to move where they like to go on the board. Each type of terrain on the board requires a certain amount of movement points, and that varies too depending on whether it's night or day. Once moved, or not moved if a player decides to stay put, the player can then either interact with the locals, if at a location that allows that, or they can attack a nearby enemy, or a fortified location. Interacting with locals involves using influence from the player's hand to get something. Depending on the location, that something could be a unit, a spell, an artifact, an action card for their deck, or just some good old healing. Attacking is a little more complicated, but it too uses cards from the player's hand, and in this case it's blocking or attacking cards. At the end of the turn, a player draws a new hand, keeping or discarding unused cards as they choose. There are plenty more rules to the game that I skipped over, but I hope this gives those who are unfamiliar with Mage Knight a brief glimpse of how it's played in a nutshell. So let's now watch a turn in action, and then I'll break down some of the educational qualities that we found within the game and within this turn. And this is my 6-year-old taking his turn about midway through the game. Tell me what you're going to do with your cards there.
I'm going to go 1-2 with
Okay.
my swiftness and 1-2 with my stamina to the village.
Okay, so that costs 4 movement. You played 2 cards, 2 movement each. What do you got left? Lots of influence. Do you want to use it?
I'm going to use Noble Manners with the white mana die.
Okay.
There.
Could you hand him a white mana die?
Yep, so like put these tiles back in. Yep. There you go. Now it gives me influence 4. If you use this during interaction, you get gain +1, reputation +1 at the end of your turn.
Great. So 4 influence, is that enough to do what you want to do?
If I'm going to get the peasants.
Okay. Now, this was a rather simple, straightforward turn, but I think you'll notice immediately that even a simple turn in Mage Knight requires quite a bit of analysis and logic reasoning. One's hand of cards on any given turn includes a certain number of possible movement points, influence, blocking potential, and attacking power. I didn't mention this in the overview, but card effects can be magnified by a player's limited mana resources, as seen in that turn, and unit abilities can also be used to augment actions. In addition, A player can use any card regardless of its stated effect as 1 point of movement, influence, block, or attack power. So basically, what a player needs to be able to do is discern what the cards in their hand are best used for and whether they are in position on the board to take advantage of said cards. In many ways, it becomes a sort of logic puzzle. There's rarely ever one right solution, but there's usually one or two optimal paths to take. A bit like trying to write an efficient computer program in my mind. I can imagine a line of code reading maybe, if movement points is greater than 4, then attack the raiding orc, else stay put and influence at a village. Of course, the decision flowchart can get quite a bit more complicated in Mage Knight, especially for younger kids. Besides the high degree of logic needed to play Mage Knight, there's also a good amount of reading required. Each card has its own text, and with a lot of the cards being unique, this increases the chances of encountering an unknown word and adding it to the child's vocabulary, albeit it takes a bit longer to learn the new words because of that. Plus, there's some big words on those cards. However, most cards are played in each round, so there is some repetition there. It also seems quite a bit easier for kids to latch on to a new word when there's some context to go with it. In this case, Mage Knight provides some great context, from the picture on the card to the effects of them, to seeing that card text put into action on the board. All that cements the new word into those little brains that much more. For pre-readers, this game may be too much though. So much of the game deals with the text on the cards that it would take a lot of effort for one who can't read yet to play independent of help. That said, it probably could be done, and I'd encourage it if the child shows a high interest and motivation in playing the game. If the desire is there, then go for it. That desire may be what fuels them to learn how to read. The artwork on the cards can be their cue to what the card does, and with enough time, maybe shorter than you might guess, they'll likely pick up some key words on the card text. One area of academics that will likely not challenge most children who play Mage Knight is the mathematics in the game. All the math in the game consists of adding single-digit numbers to single-digit numbers. There is some comparing numbers to see if one is greater than, less than, or equal. My guess is that any kindergartner or older child probably won't be challenged by this. If you plan on playing with a child younger than that, then go ahead and let them do all the math work. It may be easy, but it is fun. Adding up blocks and attacks to see if you defeat an enemy is always cool, and I'm sure kids would love the context. I'd be remiss if I didn't mention that this game, Mage Knight, can lead to great adventures in imagination and creativity. I know my kids, immediately after playing the game, wanted to make cards and more adventures based on the pieces and based on what they had already discovered in the game. The board is modular; it changes every game, so the board comes in pieces, and it works really well to make your own games with. And of course, miniatures are always fun. And guess what they're doing when they're making their own adventures or cards? They're practicing writing and spelling. So if you go that route, or if they go that route, you get that sort of practice in. To sum it all up, I'd say what Mage Knight does really well is practice and challenging logic and reasoning for kids. As far as reading goes, there's definitely some vocab that they can learn. There is definitely some practice in reading, and the fact that the whole game is based on the cards pretty much. Math-wise, it's not going to challenge the older kids, but someone 7 or younger, they might get a challenge out of the math. And then if they use it for creating other stuff, you got your writing and your spelling. I hope you enjoyed this. That wraps up Mage Knight.